Hello again, new gardeners, and a warm welcome to our returning gardeners joining us for the first time. Today's adventure in online gardening seminars will be Bock Community Gardens' new, but not necessarily improved, best practices for 2020. I'm Leslie Parker, and I'll be your narrator. Here's a vague overview of what we'll be covering today. Some of this will be repeat information for those of you who experienced our online new gardener orientation, and some of this will be repeat information for those of you who have attended our best practices sessions in the past. And all of this will be repeat information for me since I made these slides, but I promise that there will be some new information for all of you, as well as some important reminders. Now let's do this. COVID-19 is why we are doing this online, and it is important to keep it in mind as we visit the garden. While the garden is a lower risk environment because it is outside, it is not free from risk. We have 81 gardeners, plus their gardening partners and family, as well as members of the surrounding community who will visit the garden on a regular basis. Many are in at-risk health groups, so it is important that we are all in our best behavior when visiting the garden. The courts reopening the state doesn't mean the pandemic is over. Maintain the 6-foot social distancing guideline. Wearing a mask is recommended, although we are not currently requiring them. Always wash your hands with soap and water before and after visiting the garden. Reduce your exposure to shared surfaces by using a barrier when touching the gate latches. For example, I use a handkerchief. A big caveat to this rule is that if you can't wash or dispose of the barrier after using it, then you should just use your bare hands since they can be washed. And make sure you are closing and latching the gates behind you every time. Unlike the gate latches, you can avoid some shared surfaces entirely by using your own tools whenever possible. If you do use the communal tools, wash the handles of the communal tools with soap and water before and after use. Now that the surprise mid-May snowstorms are done, hopefully the city should be turning on our water any day. Once water's on, we'll put out soap and the tools. We will not be putting out the hoses since they are difficult to wash in a bucket, so be prepared to haul watering cans for the time being. Rinse your garden produce with water. Don't use soap on your produce since you could then end up eating soap, and that is not good. And most importantly, remember that gloves do not replace proper hand sanitation procedures. If you are using gardening gloves, keep in mind that they are as contaminated as whatever they touch. Treat and wash them accordingly. The committee will notify everyone if any of these guidelines change. Now that we've covered the new rules for behaving in the garden, let's talk about the old rules that everyone keeps breaking. I'm looking at you, returning gardeners. We've had to correct a few of you already this year. Set a better example for our new gardeners. Every year we have people putting dirty tools back on the tool rack. The only reason this hasn't been done yet this year is because we haven't put the tools out yet. We have had people leave the gates open. I've already had to chase one baby bunny out of the garden. It's not fun for me or the rabbit, so please close the gates every time. Forbidden plants are also recurring issues as well. Tools rule, and that's why we have tool rules. We are lucky to have a set of tools available for everyone, but it's important that everyone respects the tools so that they can continue to be of use to us. Rule number 1, return the tools after you use them. Don't forget them in your plot and leave. Number 2, clean the tool head before returning it. Get all of that dirt off while in your plot. Dirt carries weed seeds and soil pathogens. No one wants your weed seeds, and you don't want theirs. So get all that dirt off in your plot. We have wire brushes to help with that, or you can just grab a big wood chip to scrape it off. Whatever gets the job done. Just remember, do it at your plot. Not my plot, not your neighbor's plot, and definitely not at the tool rack. The tool rack doesn't need your weeds either, and knocking off all that dirt at the tool rack just builds up places for weeds to grow. So do it at your plot, and return those tools nice and shiny to the rack. Number 3, wash the tool handles off with soap and water at the spigot before and after use. This is new for this year, and I just talked about why this is important. I do recommend getting all the dirt off the tool first, or you'll just end up smearing mud over everything. I may be speaking from experience, so learn from my mistakes. Rule number 4, use the correct tool for the job. This is the most common way that tools get broken. Someone uses them incorrectly. The biggest offender is confusing the pitchforks and the spading forks. Pitchforks are long and spindly for picking up lots of light things like wood chips or hay. Spading forks have short, flat tines like long, skinny shovels for digging. Every year, someone tries to dig with a pitchfork and breaks or bends the tines. Please just don't. Number 5, if you do break a tool, please let us know. Tools break even if they're being used correctly. Our tools live busy lives, and breaking is just part of the life cycle for tools. We won't blame you, and we'll probably thank you if you let us know something is broken, so that we can take it out of circulation and repair or replace it. Now our food pantry coordinator will talk us through proper gate etiquette.
Hello, my name is Dan DeLacy. I'm a member of the Bock Community Garden Board. I'm here to talk about gate etiquette. There are 3 gates in the community, one that faces the street, one that faces the prairie, and one that faces the back. What I want to emphasize is that every time you come in, open the gate. I use this or screwdriver, and I open it and I close it so I don't have to touch the gate. And then I immediately turn around and I shut the gate. The back gate is most important. If you see the gates not fully closed, please close them each and every time. And if you're just going out for a minute to your car, or somebody's behind you and you think they're going to be there in 30 seconds or a minute, you can wait for them, but don't just walk away from the gate, because once the rabbits are in here, they have voracious appetites and they can do some damage. So again, 3 gates, always keep them fully latched, and always on your way out, glance back and make sure that you close the gate you came in and out of, and do us a favor and just glance over at the other 2 gates and make sure they're closed. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for keeping the Bock Community Garden rabbit-free.
Thanks, Dan. Remember to shut the gates behind you and keep everyone's produce safe. This is a list of plants that are not allowed in the garden. They fall into 3 main categories: poisonous, invasive, or woody. To simplify, we've listed the woody and invasive plants together as there is more overlap between those groups. Poisonous plants not allowed at Bock include a lot of pretty flowers, including foxglove, delphinium, morning glories, and daffodils. They may be pretty, but they can also make someone, particularly unsupervised children, quite sick. Invasive plants that are not allowed at Bock include mint, horseradish, and morning glories. That's right, morning glories are doubly forbidden. You new gardeners already know all about my passionate dislike for morning glories. Long story short, their relative bindweed is worse than quackgrass. For some good news, chives, dill, fennel, and oregano are allowed, big if here, guys. They are carefully controlled, as they would love to colonize your neighbor's plot if you only let them. Now let's talk about some weeds. Let's start with tips and strategies that apply to most weeds. The best thing you can do is weed early and weed often. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Don't let things get out of control like I started to in the picture. Those plants will only get harder to pull out the bigger they get. And don't let yourself get caught up trying to identify everything that sprouts a leaf in your plot. If you didn't plant it, don't give it the benefit of the doubt. Even if it's a vegetable or herb that's self-seeded, we call those volunteers, if it's not where you want it, pull it out. It took me a couple years to stop letting cherry tomatoes grow out of pity. But since I learned to be ruthless, I've been happier and had fewer weeds. Although, the weeds might have more to do with learning to mulch properly, but I'll talk about that later. Be aware that weed seeds can lie dormant in the soil for years and even decades. When we work the soil, those seeds can be brought up to the surface where they sprout, so keep an eye out for new weeds after turning the soil. To prevent cultivating your weeds as well as your produce, focus your watering efforts directly at the base of your plants. Don't water parts of your plot you haven't planted yet. Speaking of watering, pulling weeds is easiest in damp soil. Dry or muddy soil will tend to hold on to roots. A sunny day after a rain is a great time to go on a weeding spree. There are special weeding tools to help remove plants with established taproots. We have some that we will put out with the communal tools. Compostable plants should be shaken free of soil and left to dry in the sun before composting. If you're weeding when the soil is muddy, this becomes difficult. Keep in mind that not all plants are compostable. Rhizomous plants, or weeds that have gone to seed, should be removed from the garden for disposal. Rhizomous plants like quackgrass and bindweed cannot be composted, as the rhizomes will persist in the compost and grow new plants whenever the compost is spread. Always have a plastic bag or other trash receptacle on hand when weeding in order to be able to remove any non-compostable plants you pull out of your plot. Here's an example of 2 of our most common early season weeds. Dandelions are fairly well known. They're easiest to pull out when they're small, so stay on top of them, or you'll need to use a weeding tool to get them out. The roots can regrow new plants, so you really want to get that out and not just cut the top off. Don't let them go to seed, as each plant can produce up to 20,000 seeds. This is one of our edible weeds, so you can take sweet revenge for it growing in your plot by eating it, if that's your thing. Quackgrass is an example of one of those rhizomous weeds I mentioned earlier. In addition to small fibrous roots, they grow underground stems that spread out to send up more plants. These rhizomes break easily, and the pieces can produce new plants, so it's important to get as much of the rhizomes out as possible. The best approach is to carefully loosen the soil with a spading fork and then hand dig up the rhizomes. Never use a rototiller on quackgrass, as that will multiply it like crazy. Once you've removed all the quackgrass, cover the area with mulch to smother any new growth, and immediately pull up any new plants as they appear. Two more weeds that you're probably seeing a lot of right now are velvet leaf and lamb's quarters. Velvet leaf has velvety leaves, go figure. They're also heart-shaped for the ultimate awe factor in a weed. Aww. Each plant produces thousands of seeds that are viable for decades, so please don't let them go to seed. Bad news, due to the longevity of those seeds, they're pretty abundant in our compost, so you'll be seeing them year after year. Good news is that they're easy to hand pull when small and are compostable. Lamb's quarters are also abundant as seed in our compost. They have triangular leaves with uneven toothed edges and have purple stripes on the stems. They're also easily pulled by hand and can be composted. Fun fact, they're also another edible weed and are closely related to spinach. Approximately once a month, the Rules Coordinator will assess everyone's plots to make sure we're all keeping up with weeds and our plots in general. Everyone will get an email with the evaluation results and any comments or concerns the assessor has about the plot. Our first assessment will be before the end of May, so get ready! Criteria that are assessed include whether there are weeds growing in the plot or pathway, whether the path is in good repair and free from obstructions, whether any plants are encroaching on or overshading neighbors' plots, if there are any overripe produce or dead plants left to rot in the open, if there is trash or debris in the plot, or if there are any forbidden plants or pests present in the plot. Between June 15th and September 15th, plots should also be at least 75% planted. I'm going to put extra emphasis on that overshading point. Don't plant your sunflowers where they will block your neighbor's sun. That's not cool. Don't be that person. Finally, all plots need to be cleaned up for winter by November 1st. Now we can move on to the fun stuff. Most things from here on will be suggestions or options that you can take or leave as you garden. I do have at least one rule coming up though, so see if you can spot it. The best thing you can do for your garden is compost. The true secret of a green thumb is good soil. Here's why. Plants need nutrients to grow, and they get those nutrients from soil. If you remove all your plants, those nutrients are gone. But if you turn those plants into compost, all the nutrients stored in the plant while growing go back into the soil. In addition to recycling the plants you grow, adding additional compost builds your soil so that it doesn't slowly disappear due to erosion. Healthy soil retains more moisture, but is also more resistant to erosion. Composting also reduces the amount of green waste going into landfills and saves you the effort of hauling all that plant matter out of the garden. Good things to compost include compostable weeds and dead or dying plants. Some overripe produce can be composted, but be aware that plants like tomatoes and squash have seeds that require high temperatures to kill. Hay mulch can also be composted, so you don't need to haul it away when it starts to break down. You can compost your kitchen scraps in the garden as long as you don't include any meat, dairy, or poultry products, as they can carry disease and will absolutely result in rats or raccoons in the garden. That's a big no thank you. Pet poop and fresh livestock manure are also no's due to disease. Don't compost weeds that have gone to seed or diseased plants. Most plant diseases persist in soil, and you'll be propagating the disease to next year and possibly your neighbor's plots. Bag it and dispose of it at home. Your home, not the homes neighboring the garden. That's just rude. Let's go over composting at Bock Garden. We provide leaf compost out behind the back gate. It's paid for using the garden fees and is available for everyone, so go and load up a couple buckets or a wheelbarrow. When you do, it's important that you shovel from the sides and the base of the pile, and keep your receptacle close by so you don't spill or waste any. This stuff isn't cheap. So it's important to follow these steps so that most of it goes into plots and doesn't get trampled into the ground. You want to shovel from all sides of the pile or we'll end up forming a cliff like in the picture. This isn't the end of the world, but it's not ideal. It won't kill you to push the wheelbarrow that extra 4 feet to work from the far side of the pile. Besides the already decomposed stuff we provide, we recommend that everyone composts in their plot as well. The simplest in-plot method is to have a designated spot in your plot where you pile all your compostable material throughout the season. Digging a pit or building a circle of wire fencing can help keep things neat and contained. Composting bins can also be used to help accelerate the decomposition. Sometimes you have a lot of materials to deal with, like at the start or end of the growing season, and one small pile might not cut it. Here are a couple options that you can do in those instances. Spading in is when you turn the soil over to bury leaf and small green material a few inches under the soil. This can work well if you have a winter cover crop you're turning under, or a carpet of compostable weeds. Walking backwards allows you to work without walking on the freshly turned soil and immediately compacting it. Holding the blade at a 45-degree angle is recommended for optimal ease of turning the soil. Trench composting is great for the end of the year when you have a lot of material that needs to be dealt with. Dig a long trench, 18 to 24 inches deep, right down to that clay layer. Layer your plant material in the trench with produce with seeds and coarser material on the bottom. Chop up your material into sections 6 inches or less to speed up decomposition. Walking on the mound of material will help compact it down. Adding a bucket or two of leaf compost before burying the trench is a great way to build your soil and get that compost in deeper. You'll usually end up with a mound of dirt at the end, but it'll generally settle down over winter as the buried material naturally decomposes. You can sometimes spot the trench locations in winter from the bare patch where the heat from the decomposition melts the snow. Next, I'd like to talk about something that I wish I had been told when I first started gardening. Tilling is optional. No-till or no-dig gardening is a style of gardening that is becoming more popular and that I've become a fan of. But I'm also a self-professed lazy gardener. What works for me won't work for everyone, but I'd like to take a couple minutes to share why no-till gardening might be something that you should look into. I first became aware of no-till gardening while taking a soil science class at the university. Turns out soil has natural structure to it, created by the microbes and other soil organisms doing their thing. Tilling and digging disturbs that natural structure, which takes time for the soil organisms to rebuild. When I started gardening, I had this idea that tilling was necessary for plants to be able to grow well because it loosened up the soil for the roots. But it turns out that's only the case if you have heavily compacted soils. After all, the prairie growing next to garden is plenty of proof that plants do just fine without tilling. Untilled soil also retains better moisture and is more resistant to erosion. Now, I do still have to do some digging in my garden in order to plant plants or sow seeds, but I keep it to a minimum and save myself a lot of time and energy. I still apply compost, but I just deposit it at the surface unless I'm doing my end-of-year trench composting. The earthworms and their friends do just fine at incorporating the compost into the soil for me. After all, that's what they do. Applying mulch is a good idea whether you're tilling or not. We generally recommend hay, but other materials can be used as well. Our wood chips for the pathways are technically a mulch, but we do ask that you don't use them in your plots as they take longer to decompose and can be a headache for whoever gets your plot after you. When applying hay as a mulch, put down a layer that is 4 to 6 inches deep. It will compact naturally as seen in the picture, though past me could probably still have used a bit more. You can always add more later if your first layer is not quite enough. Leave space around warm weather sprouts, like tomatoes and peppers, to allow the soil to warm up as the plant grows. Once the plants are a few inches tall, you can gently push the mulch up against the stems. If you're planting more mature plants, you can skip leaving a starting gap. The big benefit of using mulch is that it keeps the soil from drying out as quickly, maintaining higher moisture levels in the soil, and also allowing more time to pass between waterings. I found that with a good layer of mulch in place, I can let the rain cover all of my watering needs unless there's an unusually long dry spell. Lazy gardening win. Sure, putting mulch down takes effort, but it's a set and leave it thing early in the season when I'm still eager and it means I don't have to fuss with coiling hoses or hauling water buckets. Last year, I even accidentally grew this giant morel mushroom in my strawberry plot. That's right, with proper mulching, you too can accidentally create the perfect growing conditions for edible fungus. On that note, I've heard some people worry that the high moisture level under mulch might lead to mold, but since the garden is outside, mold isn't usually a concern. The only times I've seen mold in the garden, it was on rotting produce or in isolated spots on the pathway wood chips. Besides retaining moisture, mulch also reduces soil temperature by keeping light from reaching it. This means mulching can prolong the growing season for cool weather crops. The other big benefit of mulching is that it suppresses weeds. It does this twofold by reducing the number of weed seeds that germinate and then smothering the growth of those plants that do germinate. Some weeds may still make it through the mulch, but they are much fewer and easy to pull out due to the damp soil and their spindly growth while struggling to grow up through that mulch. Another plus for the lazy gardener. There are a couple less obvious benefits to mulching. By providing a protective layer over the soil, mulching reduces soil erosion. It also prevents soil particles from getting splashed up onto plants when it rains or during watering. This keeps your plants and produce cleaner and reduces their exposure to pathogens carried in the soil. Mulch can also improve the quality of produce like cucumbers, melons, or squash by preventing them from resting directly on the soil. The only downside for mulching that I found while researching it is that it can increase slug activity. It can also provide the perfect environment for our resident voles to hide in. Row covers are a great way to protect your plants and extend your growing season. The covers retain heat while allowing light, water, and air to pass through them. In a sense, they act like permeable greenhouses with sunlight coming in and turning into heat that is trapped. This allows the soil to warm up faster in spring and protects plants from light frost. By using row covers, you can start planting warmer crops earlier and extend your growing season. Similarly, in the fall you can use row covers to protect from early frosts and give your plants a little extra time to produce. Row covers can also block pests such as bugs, birds, and some small mammals. To use row covers, place the cover after planting or sowing seeds. Make sure the edges are buried or weighed down to prevent pests from being able to crawl under loose edges. Be aware that any pests that emerge from the soil will be trapped in with your plants, so check for damage regularly. While your edges should be secure, you want to leave some slack in the fabric that drapes over your plants so that there is room for them to grow and lift the cover with them. Heavier weight covers may need to be supported, and some sensitive plants will need to have the cover lifted away from their tender leaves. Unfortunately, the wonderful growing conditions created by row covers also benefit weeds, so you'll need to periodically remove or get access under the covers to do some weeding. Once the ambient conditions are right, remove the covers for increasing periods of time over several days to allow the crops to harden. An overcast day is an opportune time for the cover to come off for good. Unused or undamaged used covers should be stored out of direct sunlight as UV rays cause the material to break down. We started with the soil and we've worked our way up to reaching for the sky. That's right, it's vertical gardening time. Vertical gardening refers to any method of maximizing the number of plants per square foot of space by utilizing vertical space. That could be by training plants to grow upward, or by creating additional planting spaces by using hanging planters or tiered growing shelves. By increasing the number of plants you grow, you increase the amount of produce you get. Vertical gardening also has other benefits, such as improving the airflow around plants and making harvesting easier by bringing the produce up within easy reach. It can also improve the quality and appearance of your produce. A good example of this is that cucumbers that hang will be straight, while cucumbers that develop on the ground will be curved. Growing produce away from the ground also protects them from pests and critters and makes it a lot harder to accidentally step on them. On the right, you can see a list of the produce that is commonly grown vertically. I've grown all of these vertically, except for the melons, which I plan to try this year, if my seeds ever arrive. In the picture, you can see an example of using the same structure to grow two different plants vertically. This wasn't something I intended to do, but my beans decided to colonize the top of the cages I was using to support my bell peppers, and since it made it really easy to get to those bean pods, I went with it. The things I've talked about are by no means exhaustive, and I recommend every gardener go out and do their own research to find the style of gardening that works best for them. Talk to your gardening neighbors to find out what they are doing and what has or hasn't worked for them in the past. You might learn something new, or even make a friend. Aww. Just remember to maintain that 6-foot social distance. But what if you're never in the garden at the same time as your neighbors, or maybe you don't like talking to strangers? Then it's time to go on a Google adventure. The internet is full of gardening resources, including articles, videos, garden planner programs, and forums. To get started, I recommend checking out one of our local resources, the UW Extension. The UW Extension has an online learning store with hundreds of documents about gardening, including topics specific to our area, such as local pests or the best cultivars for our part of Wisconsin. Don't be scared off by the prices. All of the documents can be downloaded as PDFs for free. The pricing is just for a physical copy. To download a document, simply click on the document you're interested in to open up its description page. Once there, click on the button that says View Publication. And ta-da! A new window should open with the PDF. From there, you can download it, print it, or read it online. All right, that concludes our best practices for 2020, and it didn't even take 2 hours like the in-person session. Part of it is not being able to have you ask questions, but you're welcome to email us or post to our Facebook page if you have any. Good luck with your gardens, stay safe out there, and don't forget to close the gates.